Welcome, everyone. I'm Catherine. We'll start in just a couple of minutes. I'm actually going to share one of the questions we're going to discuss on the webinar, and you are welcome to unmute and share some thoughts. You're welcome also, if you prefer, to put comments in the chat. We're going to be talking today about challenges that are faced by sales and marketing teams in today's environment. What are some of the biggest ones you see? Great. I just put this in the chat. So welcome, everyone. Hi, Vance. Hi, Mark.
Hey.
Yeah. Vance, you're unmuted. Any thoughts?
I am.
Challenges? Yeah, challenges faced by sales and marketing teams in today's environment?
Yeah. I think just sales cycles can be long depending on your product or service. That's one of our biggest challenges is, it's a qualified prospect. They're showing indications that they want to move forward, but there's just not that compelling event to drive them to close.
Yeah. What else are you attributing that to?
For us, we do exit planning. So, if it's not a referral, then it's likely that it's not top of mind. We do a lot of outreach. So usually that it can take 3, 4, or 5 calls to just establish that baseline trust. So, for most of them, it's the biggest transaction of their life, right? So, if it wasn't top of mind, it could be, yeah, we're going to do this 3 or 5 years out from now. And we don't want to be pushy, right? Because this is a big thing. We have to kind of go at their pace. So yeah, it's something we talk about all the time is the length of our sales cycle and how to drive urgency without, breaching trust or, just coming off the wrong way.
Yeah, Vance, it'd be really fun. This is going to be a very interactive time. So please make sure that we come back around to this. And I'm also going to make a note. What comes to my mind that would be fun that I think we can fold into the discussion today is what is marketing and what is sales? And I wonder if the point at which you're considering your sales cycle, like maybe part of why it feels long is because you're actually still in a marketing phase.
Sure.
Right. Which is part of what's moving and changing in this time, right? So maybe there'll be some specific recommendations and considerations you can take back to your team. That's certainly our goal.
Yeah.
Welcome, Nick, Brock. Glad you're here. We're going to start in another minute or so, but we're opening up with this idea. I'll put it in the chat again. I know you can't see the chat from when it's formerly posted before you come in the room, but my name is Catherine Brown and I'm facilitating today. And we're opening up with these questions of what challenges are being faced by sales and marketing teams in today's environment? What are some of the biggest challenges that you're seeing? We want to make sure we address those on the call today. So please unmute and, share. Mark, did you have something?
Me, Mark?
Yeah, Mark Bishop. I saw you were unmuted, so I didn't know if you went.
Yeah. So one of the things I see, I'm an independent sales consultant and I work with privately owned companies. And when I work with salespeople, the first thing I see with most companies and the sales team is they don't identify what's good business for the company. So it's a struggle to get face-to-face meetings. I think that's a challenge for most or all salespeople. It's a goal to get face-to-face meetings and start a process. But a lot of companies don't clearly define what's good business, and a lot of salespeople waste time on bad business. And
Mark,
there's solutions for that, but that's a problem I see across the board.
Yeah, that's great. So do you think that there's something that's shifted that makes that a unique challenge right now, or does it present differently than it used to? Because part of me thinks this is a lot of people's challenge for a long time. What do you think is particularly unique about the timing around that?
For me, it's been an issue for the 15 years I've been doing this. Nothing's changed. Nothing's in writing. People have ideas in their head, but there's nothing consistent that everybody can live with.
Interesting.
Right.
Thank you. We're glad you're here. Erik, Craig, ready for us to kick off? What do you think?
I think it's time to light this rocket.
Okay, great. Well, we will keep letting people in, and we are just so glad that you're able to join us today. Let me share a screen and get us going. So my name is Catherine Brown. We're so glad that you're here. I am the moderator of this discussion today between Craig and Erik. We're all going to take a few sentences and introduce ourselves in just a moment among the panel. And I would really like to encourage you all as attendees to put your contact information in the chat and be actively participating. It probably a bunch of sales and marketing professionals here. Referrals are such a meaningful way of building each of our businesses, and we want to get to know you. So please don't hesitate to use the chat liberally. You're here for our discussion about building a next generation sales approach. We're going to talk about what's working, what's not working, what's shifted, some nuances of language that I think will be really fun to hone in on in our discussion that I've learned in prepping for this event with Erik and Craig. And in just a second, we'll introduce ourselves. Let me show you the basic agenda. We're going to do some introductions among the three of us. We have some discussion topics to kick us off. The reason I'm opening with the questions as you were coming in the room is because we really want to talk about your questions, and we're very flexible about how we morph the conversation over the next hour. So by you using the chat, that will really help us. And what we'll do is I'll watch that. Ellen's here to help me as well. And I'll be watching the chat. And what's going to happen is people will talk a little bit, and then I'll pause and I'll open it up and I'll comment about something that's there and invite you even to jump in. So I'm looking for a very interactive time. If you can't and you need to be hidden, I understand sometimes that happens. We're still glad you're here. But the more you can participate and the more that you tell us what you're seeing, I think the more dynamic and interesting this will be for everybody. So that's our goal. Okay, so I'm going to go back and forth from sharing because mostly we want to see each other's faces. And so let's do some intros. So Erik, you were so kind to invite me to participate and to pull Craig and me together. So why don't you go first with your intro?
Well, I would love to do an intro. My name is Erik, and I'll be the marketing guy here. So I'm the founder and CEO of Astound, and what we do is we help business leaders find their marketing breakthroughs. I'm the author of this book called The Unified Marketing System, and what that is, it's a process for building marketing plans at scale. I'm also a part-time professor at MSU here in Denver. I teach teaching the marketers of the future. I do a lot of speaking at events. I'm speaking through Vistage as well. And one personal thing, we decided to do 4 business things and a personal thing for our intros. I am very hoping to run a half marathon this year, my first one, and I'm trying to be faster and less rotund. So I'm working on that. That is my personal thing.
I think rotund is the best word ever. That's awesome. Craig, you please go next.
Thank you, Catherine. My name is Craig Lowder, and I'm the founder and president of the Mainspring Sales Group. We're located in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Our goal in life is to create significant, predictable, and sustainable sales growth with our clients through developing a sales growth strategy, ensuring that they have the systems in place to enable that growth, and that the sales teams are organized correctly and they have the right people in the right seats. I'm also the author of Smooth Selling Forever, and we'll be releasing another new book in July called Trusted Advisor Confidential. And Chris is reminding me with his Packer fan, or his emblem in the background. I'm a diehard Bears fan up in Packerland. Go Bears!
All right, introducing some divisiveness in our call early, Craig. Glad you all are here. I'm Catherine Brown, and I'll be the moderator today. I would describe myself first point, serial entrepreneur, started 5 companies, 3 made it, 2 haven't. So I've certainly learned a lot from that process. One of my current businesses is my second point. During lockdown and COVID, I took the sales training material that I had built to lead to B2B sales teams. And I decided that the customer I really love the most is the small business entrepreneur who has to sell their own product or service and really wishes they didn't have to. I love working with that person. I love helping them shift their mindset about selling. And what that leads to is it leads to me needing to be a strong marketer too, because they often have little or no marketing department or use an agency, or they would use someone like Erik, which is awesome. That's part of how we know each other. But they have to be thinking about what is it that I really sell, and how do I bring this to market? And so it really makes you go all the way back to sales and marketing fundamentals, which is why I love our topic today. My fourth point is that I am also an author. So this is a panel of authors. I wrote a book that came out 2 years ago called How Good Humans Sell. And that is the name of my community as well, the How Good Humans Sell community, which is really for those entrepreneurs who are trying to get better at selling. My personal point is I have 2 young men that as sons now, and I love to encourage all parents, especially women, who want to have a profession and are trying to raise children at the same time. And I want to just speak hope to them and say, every stage is great, but big kids are wonderful. So we're entering this new stage of life that I'm enjoying so much with adult children. And it's really been fun. So that's a little bit about me. And I think we're ready to kick off with the opening question. Okay, so one of the things that I'd like to open us with, and then I'll be watching the chat, and like I said, inviting people to participate, is that, we know that we've been going through a volatile time the last several years. We're probably tired of words like unprecedented and things like that, but we've lived through it. We're on the other side of it. And there are some terms that I find still get thrown around that probably bear out defining early on, so that for the purpose of this call and then marketing for the future with our use of this webinar, let's make sure we all mean the same things when we're talking about certain terms. So my first question, Craig, to you, and then I'll take it to Erik, is what do you think that virtual selling means to people now? And when you hear that term, what comes to mind?
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Virtual selling is all about not being in person, face to face, and whether it's using technology like Zoom, Teams, or even the basic telephone, people are viewing that as virtual selling.
So interesting. That's why I'm asking the question, because I think I would have defined it different. So that's why I'm glad we're doing this. Erik, what about you?
I like Craig's definition. I think that virtual selling. So I use virtual selling to describe basically anything that's outside of that that face-to-face meeting, that where we're actually sitting at the table together. The one thing that I'm not sure that Craig mentioned explicitly, I would group chat sales into that as well, and I would group uh, to a lesser extent like social selling. But I think that really virtual, I would use the term to describe anything that isn't we're sitting across a table from each other somewhere.
Thank you so much. Would be interested, please use the chat for our participants and tell us if you think we've missed something or what you think. I think that in my mind, when I hear virtual selling, I do automatically go to video. I don't know why. I think maybe it's just the complaints from entrepreneurs and sales teams I've worked with complaining about selling specifically over video. That's why I bring up the question, because if we're going to contrast one thing with another, we want to have a common language for doing that.
Oh,
Craig,
absolutely.
yeah, go ahead, Erik. Go
No, I
ahead.
was just gonna say, well, we were talking before the rest of these folks came on, and I was talking about how I viewed virtual selling. I was doing it 10 years ago, but I was doing it over the phone. I had a lot of clients 10 years ago or 13, even 14 years ago, where I had never met them in person, and we were conducting most of our business over the phone and via email. And so that was still virtual selling even then. But I think that now, as soon as you say, virtual selling, hybrid meetings, virtual meetings, I think that people just instantly think Zoom.
I think there's a little bit of confusion over in person versus face to face. Many folks confuse that fact. We're actually face to face today, and the successful companies are moving those traditional telephone conversations to virtual settings like we're in today, where we can see one another face to face.
Craig, this is a conversation that you and I've had, and I love that point so much. And I want to dig into that a little bit more. I want to talk about what does using the term in person versus face to face, why is that language important in today's selling environment? What does it do for our perspectives if we choose one of those terms versus another?
I think the old dogs, and I can say that because I have gray hair and I've got glasses on, they often say, yeah, but I can't build a relationship. I need to be face to face. Well, wait a minute, guys and gals. We're face to face right now. We're just not in person. And being face to face is better than exchanging emails or having a telephone conversation, because I think most of us know the various ways that the forms of communication, being face to face and seeing people's expressions tells a lot of the story. Like, Catherine, I know you're hearing me, but I'm not sure you're buying that. Can you help me understand what you're thinking right now? So moving everything, keeping things as much face to face as possible is important. The best companies, and again, it's not being driven by us as sellers, it's being driven by the buyers. They don't want to meet with us in person. And quite frankly, there's more value in meeting like we're meeting right now, face to face. So we can have more face to face interactions than we did previously, which in turn is going to help us build a solid relationship with those prospects and those customers.
And we can have more in two regards, being that number one, we can talk to more people face to face than would have been available to us because you know Catherine lives in Texas, and I live in Colorado, and Craig lives in Wisconsin, and yet we've been able to be face to face several times as we've been discussing this. And number two, if I don't have to get in the car and go somewhere, that means I also have more capacity for face to face meetings than I did 10 years ago or however long ago. I had and these meetings are very important because obviously when you're meeting, so obviously talking to somebody is better than reading an email, because if you read the email, a lot of that tone gets lost, and very often we misinterpret what someone's emotion is as they're writing it. We see somebody put something in all caps and we think that they're angry, and maybe they didn't intend that. On the phone, we can hear some of that nuance in their voice, but we can't see the expression on their face, and we can't see that this is a happy person that's smiling, that's engaged, that's actually listening to us, and that isn't going and doing something else in the background while I'm talking, while I'm soliloquizing over the benefits of marketing. Um, so now we've got that connection. We just didn't have to drive for it. I had, unfortunately, the misfortune of hiring a salesperson that essentially a month before COVID started, that had a very difficult time wrapping his head around that this could be the same as actually sitting down in a conference room or in a coffee shop or in an office. And there are unfortunately a lot of folks that feel that way, and I think that it's time to move past.
What are
And
your
so,
thoughts, Catherine?
well, I think language matters so much in selling. It matters in marketing too, with copy. But I think that a change of words makes such a difference. For example, those of you that jumped in a little bit later, I was sharing that I work with entrepreneurs who are the owner seller in their business. And if you can make a shift with one word with a preposition, if people can understand that selling is something they do for someone and it's not something they do to them or at them, it'll change everything. So I just think language matters so much. So I think my first takeaway from this, Craig, that I want our participants to get, and I'm going to invite comments in the chat. I'm going to invite you to raise your hand if you would like to make a comment or ask about this before we move on. But on purpose, we started with this foundational definition of saying, what do we mean when we say face-to-face versus in person? And we're making the case that using the term face-to-face for a video call is important for your sales team because it communicates that there is a certain level of intimacy and understanding and real connection that's possible. And it moves away, and I would argue starts to remove some of the excuses of people's personal preferences of being in person. Sometimes it's just not possible. And Craig, I'm about to ask you about the statistics, but there's a lot of research that's bearing out that buyers don't want to meet people face to face. Excuse me, they don't want to meet people in person. They want the convenience of the way we're meeting now. So I'm going to go to statistics in just a second because you had some really cool recent stats. Does anybody have a comment or question about this thought about language? What language to take to your team? Why the language matters? Why we are harping on what face-to-face means versus saying the words in person? Curious about your thoughts. Okay, well, I'll assume we have buy-in. Craig, recent statistics are changing so much about what the buyer's expectations are. Let's camp out on that for a little while because there's such vast implications for both marketers and sellers with that. Tell us what you've learned.
May I give you two factoids, Catherine? Most recently, the RAIN Group published an article in April that said, what are the primary ways of selling? And they said that sellers, 43% of them are selling in a hybrid environment, which means in person and virtual. 32% are selling remotely only, and only 25% are focused on in-person selling. So if you look at hybrid and remote, that's 3/4 of the market. That's 75%. What's really interesting is Gartner came out with a study right after COVID, and they said that 75% of B2B buyers and sellers prefer remote or virtual selling, and only 20% want to go back to in-person, and that decisions were being made 32% of the time for decisions that equated to a $50,000 to $500,000 investment, and 12% of $500,000 to over $1 million investment. So people are making very large investments without ever meeting their sales representative in person. And I'm just going to close it and say, folks, we're in a digital world, whether it's marketing or it's sales execution. We're in a digital world, and we have to find a way to leverage that. Otherwise, we're going to be left at the station. Quite frankly, the train has already left the station.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thanks, Craig. Yeah, Erik, please chime in.
Yeah, Craig, I can't. Craig sends me a lot of stats, so I don't know. I don't recall if this is one that he sent me or one that I found on my own. But Trust Radius did a survey about a year ago, and what they found was that in addition to all of the things that Craig just said, nearly 100, basically 100% of buyers now want a self-serve buying process. They do not want to be put in this, this like virtual rocket ship with the salesperson where they're talking your ear off, where the buyers are now they do need to talk to somebody sometimes. Um, but a lot of them are really wanting to contribute to their own sales journey. They want to guide their own sales journey as they're looking to buy something. And what they aren't looking for is that, is that sort of old school relationship with sales where, there was an old cartoon metaphor when a lot of us were kids that hasn't really aged well. There was this trope where you had the caveman that would hit the cave lady over the head with the club and then drag her back into the into the cave. That used to be our relationship with sales. Sales would sort of like hammer you on the head and try to drag you into, back into their office to sign the contract. And people aren't looking for that. People don't respond well to that, and they're looking for a process where they can help guide their own process. And sales reps aren't even considered a top 5 resource anymore for people looking to buy most anything.
I follow so many people on LinkedIn that are talking about artificial intelligence and what it will mean for both of our industries. And of course, we could spend 5 hours on that. We'll probably touch on it a little bit, but it makes me think about how it's germane to what you're saying here, Erik, as another factor that presses in on redefining what it means to be a marketer and redefining what it means to be a seller right now. And I like that there's so much animated conversation happening on social and in conversations like this about this very topic, because it's going to require everyone to change their game and to be a learner and to adjust accordingly. For the seller, if people want to self-serve further and further along the way before they ever speak to a live person, that creates new responsibilities and burdens on marketing. And it also requires a different way of selling, and it requires the salesperson to retool and understand that they're entering at a different stage. So before we start making suggestions about that, or we've had a little bit of comment in the chat, please feel free to share, what's working for you, what questions you have, and we'll come to those. I want to let's come from the angle for a minute and kind of double down on what's not working, and then we'll circle back around to our recommendations. So I'll go first on that. What's not working is for companies that have technical things to explain, complicated things to explain. Let's assume we're mostly talking about B2B stuff here. Having a demo that requires a live person that's shown over and over and over again, ultimately culminating in an in-person committee presentation, people don't want to buy that way anymore. I do have clients that still try to do things that way, but that's a dying model, because people want to learn more about your product. They want to research ahead of time, and they want to become much more educated before they have their first conversation typically. So that's an example of what I'm seeing as something that's not working. Erik or Craig, what else is not working?
What fundamentally doesn't work is the old school division between sales and marketing. The idea that sales has their silo, and do their thing, and marketing has their silo and does their thing, and then marketing, they get the leads, and then the lead gets handed over to sales, and that's the relationship. That thing fundamentally doesn't work anymore. The idea that piece where that handoff is made is not clean anymore. I compare it more to sort of an estuary where that place in along the coast where the fresh water and the salt water meet, and it's like a whole other environment. That's really what's happening now. Is that, to Catherine's point, people are looking for more marketing type help before they get to sales, but they're also looking for more help afterwards. Once sales gets involved, that's not sort of the end of that. That's a continuation of that, and that self-serviceness is still happening. And so essentially, sales and marketing is one single process. and we have to treat it like that in the way that we organize the work. We can't just
Mm.
say this is sales, this is marketing, never the twain shall meet. We really need to put them together.
Craig, it makes me think about the role. I've been in sales long enough that there didn't used to be a position called Chief Revenue Officer. I mean, that role did not exist. So the fact that there's a role for that now, I think, is demonstrating that coming together that people are trying to do. I feel like what Erik is saying is pretty aspirational for many companies. I mean, my clients mostly still have messy handoffs. So I am super curious about, not arguing it's not working. I'm just curious about what percent we're seeing in that, or what you're seeing with this, Craig.
I think the term CRO, Chief Revenue Officer, is becoming more frequently mentioned, but nobody really knows really what it is. And it's really, having a CSO and a CMO working together. And I have to piggyback on what Erik just said. Sales and marketing have to be entangled, intertwined. We have to be twins. We have to work for one another like a piston to make the car go forward. The piston has to go up and down. So we have to have a very collaborative relationship with marketing. And specifically, if you look at the way that sales is being done today, there's 3 levels of thinking: cognitive thinking, divergent thinking, and convergent thinking. So picture or draw an upside down snowman. The biggest ball is on the top. Cognitive thinking is all about, well, what am I going to buy? Where are people getting information? They're not getting from their salespeople. They're doing it online. So you have to have very, very strong digital content that's easy to find. And groups are saying that's 2/3 of the sales process now. And quite frankly, as sellers, that's our best chance to make our point and bend the needle a little bit in our favor. Then there's the divergent thinking. Okay, now that I've decided what I'm going to buy, what are my options? Who can I buy it from? And then convergent, I'm going with this particular provider. But we are in a digital world. So the combination of sales and marketing, we have to be tightly aligned. The big challenge that I'm seeing out there is too many companies are still standing hold of, we need an outside salesperson and we need to meet with these people in person. No, they don't. Buyers don't want to meet with us in person. There was an article that I wrote and some research that I did on the benefits of virtual selling. Number one, buyers think they can make better decisions. Why? Because it's much easier to organize meetings and have more buying influences involved in the discussion, which in turn, because of the convenience of those meetings, leads to faster decisions, better decisions. Meetings are easier to schedule, and if we do it properly, our meetings are actually shorter. End of the day, buyers are saying, we get productivity gains about buying this way, and we're also realizing cost savings.
Thanks so much, Craig. I really like several things that you said there, and it's making me think, for us to move into, okay, well, what are examples of what is working? I love your upside down snowman. I literally wrote it over here. I'm like, okay, I'm copying that. So you all take that information back to your teams. That was really helpful. We had a great question in the
But
chat.
how do
Nick
you
is at,
dress an upside down snowman? I think it's really the
they
better
have big
question.
tent-like clothing, right? It's just a big tent.
Don't wear a skirt, Erik.
Nick is asking, what tips would you give to a marketer that's also pushed into the sales side due to limitations of a small team? How do you make that crossover and adjust priorities? So thanks, Nick, so much for that question. I'm going to use that to push us into a conversation about, what are we seeing people do well? It's one thing to say, aspirationally, this is what people should do. Here's what it should look like. Let's talk about what we really see. Okay, I'll give you an example of what I really see. I have a very small software company that I work with, very small, meaning 2 SDRs, 1 account manager, and the director of sales who used to be a marketer. Okay, so it reminds me a little bit of your scenario here. And one of the things I love about a marketer moving into an over sales role is that I think a unique perspective that they can bring. And one suggestion I would make that I'll offer as a tip based on your question. So again, everyone look at the chat. The question is, what tips would you give a marketer that's also pushed into the sales side due to limitations of a small team? I think this question can be really relevant to everybody because we're talking about the convergence of sales and marketing. And one of the things that has helped my client is the fact that because they come from marketing, they're always asking the question, what are we really selling? What are we really selling? And when I say that, what I mean is at the base level, if you're talking to a software company, people's instinct is to say, well, we're selling a software that accomplishes the following things for people. But if you keep saying, tell me more, tell me more, tell me more, and you drill in, you start to get into the motives and values that people have, their priorities, what they hope to accomplish through making this transition to this new kind of system, right? All of those buyer motivations, which the best marketing and the best selling develop tools, both from a thought leadership standpoint about what you write about how you really help and what business problems you solve for people, as well as the other thing it brings is it should bring about real consultative selling so that even though it might be later that the sales team is speaking to someone, is speaking to a prospect because they wanted to do as much research as they could before they got on a call, the salesperson should be better because they should be better equipped to go right for those motivations and finding out what remains in the questions that you have. I'm not just showing up so you can throw up information all over me that I can find online. I want you to give me resources, thought leadership, direction about what I should be considering. And when I finally talk to the salesperson, I want it to be meaningful and I want to jump right in. I don't want you to rehearse what's been done before. So I just think marketers can offer so much good leadership in answering that question. What do we really sell? Erik, Craig, what would you add to that?
I would add that I think it's a real gift for somebody who's coming in, because generally, somebody is coming into this either from the sales side or the marketing side, and whether they were in those roles sort of willingly or whether they got roped in is a different story. But legitimately, I think it's a real gift when somebody who comes into the process from one side gets to experience what the other side is trying to accomplish and gets to walk in their shoes. And specifically, when you're a marketer that is pulled into the sales process, the real gift is having access to real customers, to real buyers, to be able to get inside their heads and hear what they're saying, but with the ears of a marketer. One thing that I try to tell my my students at Metro State is that every buying decision is an emotional decision. And a lot of us don't think that way, but it's absolutely true. And it doesn't matter if we're buying, a CRM package for our business, if we're hiring a marketing agency, if we're buying a can of soup at the grocery store. Every single buying decision that we make has an emotional attachment. And one thing that sales folks are not always good at is hearing what that other reason is, and not just trying to hammer home that I'm here to get you to sign something. And so I think that there's a real gift for you in being in that role.
And I concur with what Erik said entirely. And this gets back again, reinforcing that sales and marketing are not silos. We need to work together. We need to have one another's backs. We need to support one another. And our roles may be a little bit different in the process when it comes to targeting or messaging or sales process mapping. But the reality is we need to work together collaboratively, and we need to learn with one another and come up with one path that is a series of best practices that a company needs to take.
Thanks, Craig. So before we go on to another question, I'm going to give people a chance to use either their real physical hand or they can use their Zoom yellow hand. If you have a comment that you want to make or chime in or say, hey, Nick, have you tried this? Or this is what's worked for us? Or you have a question. You want to challenge something we've said so far. This is an interactive time. Lydia, thanks so much. Yeah, please unmute and jump in.
Yeah, I just came in, and I was listening to Erik and then Craig. And as a sales professional, I have to say the way that Erik portrayed salespeople is not the way to break down silos and foster communication across marketing and sales.
Tell me more. What did you feel was true about that?
He just I felt like, it's like, well, instead of talking about salespeople not doing anything but hammering prospects for the sale, and not taking time to understand where they're coming from. And the sales professionals that I interact with, we are very conscientious about being in service. And that Erik gave the impression that is not his perception of salespeople.
And I apologize if I misstated you. What we had talked about ahead of time, and was really about how sales and marketing are part of the same process, and the overlap is more than ever. There is definitely a tradition about what sales is supposed to do, and what sales is in many organizations, whether we like it or not. What sales is supposed to do is they're supposed to grind. We measure how many phone calls we make. We measure how many meetings they go to, and we, and this is what a lot of salespeople are taught at their first entry level roles, is that what sales is a grind.
Mm-hmm. With their KPIs or however they're measured in certain cultures.
And a lot of folks, and to be like super frank, and yeah, sales is a service, and but to be super frank, when salespeople don't get sales, salespeople tend to get fired, and marketers get fired for all kinds of reasons as well, that aren't necessarily fair or based on the reality of what the situation is. But what I would say is that what we need to do is actually unify the process so that we can all hear each other. Mm-hmm. And a salesperson shouldn't be measured by how many contracts they sign. That's not, they're not always necessarily in control of that. And so,
well, it depends on where they are in the sales organization. And certainly the number of contracts that are signed is a prime KPI, if you want to call it that. I mean, it's the only thing that the C-suite cares about is the bottom line. The bottom line is the bottom line, and how do we get there? And everybody working together, speaking the same language, on the same team, moving the ball down the field to the goal together is what it's all about. And that means that marketing and sales really need to use the same language and collaborate. In terms of quotas, in terms of quota. I mean, there's debate about whether SDRs even belong in sales. Maybe they should belong in marketing, because they're the ones that are doing discovery and scheduling those initial meetings.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and unreasonable quotas of all sorts are a real problem in the sales space.
Yeah,
I'll,
that seems to fall, Lydia. It's like that's in the what's maybe
and
not working category quite as
I'll go
much.
you
Yeah.
one. I'll
Well,
go
I
you
think
one better.
marketers should walk in salespeople's shoes more to understand what we do, as well as the other side, sales working in marketing. I mean, I come from a full cycle sales background where I had to develop my own marketing materials in
Mm-hmm.
small companies and startups.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Me too, Lydia. Eric, go ahead, and then I'm
yeah,
going to make
I
a
was just gonna say, and then I know we need to move on, but you know, I think that what you just said is very constructive, but I think it's only the beginning. Sales and marketers need to share a lot more than the same language. They need to share the same goals and objectives. They need to share the same
Well, we
budget,
have to start somewhere, don't we?
and they have to and I actually one of my favorite things that some organizations are now doing. I was talking to a sales consultant about this a few weeks ago. Um, they actually have compensation programs now where the salespeople get part of their bonus based on marketing performance, and the marketers get part of their bonus based on sales performance. And so if ever there was a reason to work together and to collaborate, let's actually tie our own bottom lines to our cooperative success.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Eric, as an example. So those that came later might not know. We talked about what isn't working, and we're moving towards, okay, well, what are specific suggestions of things that we see people do that really are working? Craig, I'm going to give you a chance to speak. I'm going to make a suggestion and give a pro tip for what I've used with clients that I hope you all can take away with that as well. And then I've got one more question to bring us home. So, Craig, let me give you a chance.
Repeat the question again for me, if you would, Catherine.
Yeah. Do you want to add anything to and any final thoughts on things that you can either wrap up or what's not working, and then or push us into tips for what you see people are doing that is working,
Okay,
or bringing together sales and marketing.
I believe there are 5 things that we need to collaborate on, as I call them stars. Number 1 is targeting the right prospects. Sales and marketing need to be on the same page. Delivering a message that resonates with our target audience. Sales and marketing need to be on the same page, and it's a collaborative effort. Sales process mapping. We need to understand from the point of lead generation all the way through the delivery of the final product or service. And typically that doesn't happen. And sales and marketing need to collaborate there. And what I refer to as sales success standards, which a lot of people refer to as KPIs, of having the right activities and results that are being tracked and ensuring that there is a crossover and joint accountability, although that's hard to say, between sales and marketing for achieving those objectives. And then finally, the 5th is making sure that the sales teams are organized correctly and you have the right people in the right seats. And the big problem that I'm seeing out there, they're not organized correctly for this new digital world. We're hanging on to what happened 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Right. So we talked a minute ago, Craig, about how now there are CROs. They're literally positions that didn't exist before. And Lydia was giving the example of how maybe SDRs or BDRs should actually report differently, or we need to sort of, turn that over again as a model and think about how to think resourcefully and creatively how to sell differently now. I love those examples. Thank you for the 5 things. I haven't ever heard you teach on that before. So that was really cool. I'm going to build on your point number 2 about a message that resonates, and I'll give people a chance. Don't forget, put your comments in the chat. You can be prepared to ask a question in a second if you like. But on a message that resonates, I'm going to tell you something that's really worked for me and my team and for some of my clients. So hopefully this will help some of you. If you have a joint sales and marketing meeting and you ask this question, you say, what is the whole problem that our clients experience? Let's get a whiteboard. Just say, what's the whole problem? People start writing, right? They go, this. It's just name. Okay, lots of things are the whole problem. All the aspects of whatever is the problem that your company solves. Okay. Then you ask the question number 2. You ask, what does the client think the whole problem is? Then you make a list, which will be invariably significantly shorter than your first list. Okay. And now the third step is the paradigm shift is to ask yourself, look at the 2 lists and say, my client thinks this is their whole problem, but we know this is the whole problem, pointing back to list number 1. The difference between list number 1 and list number 2 is a place to start with your content marketing leadership. Because you know the whole problem that they have that they don't yet realize. And that gives you content to write, blog, social post, and speak about, saying, as a paradigm shift, you might think your challenge is X. We find it's also this. Okay, that kind of seller, that kind of person that can talk about those differences, I think that is next generation selling. I think that's what's required of us. And literally all you have to do to start those conversations to get some consensus around, again, this is Craig's second point. First is targeting the right prospect. Second is to have a message that resonates. You've got to get agreement about what the whole problem is. So that has worked so well. Craig, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a course that I used to teach on messaging. It's called Power Messaging. There's a book called Conversations That Win the Complex Sale by Tim Rister and Eric Peterson. And there's a 5-step process. And they teach, and I taught the process of a Venn diagram. You start with it's important to your customer. Then you talk about what we do extremely well. And there's going to be some overlap there. And those are the areas where we can start to develop our message. But quite frankly, that's not the real world. There's competition out there. So we have to find a space where there's an intersection between what's important to the client, what we do extremely well that our competition can't do, and what they refer to in the book is called your value wedge. And that's where you develop your message and you carry the banner and you go to war with those. Because even competitors who say, well, we can do that, they probably don't have proof points. So you need to make sure that you have proof points that show you are, and I don't like the word differentiating as much as distinguishing you from your competition. Your message needs to distinguish you. That's positive.
I'm going to go one better. Because you guys both described really constructive, sort of workshopping types of environments that you can have with your people, virtually or in an office. And that's terrific. And it's very, very next level. The problem is in both of those examples is that one person wasn't actually represented, the customer. They weren't there. And while we can say, well, the customer wants this and this is what they want, a lot of times we get those things wrong. And it's human nature to get them wrong. What we were working with a sales team that was in the telecom expense management business, and that is about as fast-paced and fascinating an industry as you could possibly imagine. And the premise behind telecom expense management, though, is essentially that there's all these hidden fees. The billing is very complicated, and you're spending a lot more than you should be. It's a very, very tangible business pain. And the fact that these companies exist, even though I poke a little fun, it's very dry, but it is absolutely fundamentally necessary. And so what they did was they went to market with a message that was essentially, we will cut your telecom expenses 10% in the first year guaranteed, or we will work for free until we achieve that. And man, that was a great message. And so what we did was we went and called their customers, and we called the folks that were in buying processes with them and people who had said no. And it was amazing how many people were sucked in by that guarantee. Zero. None of them cared. That wasn't the pain. We came up with a really great problem to solve, but that problem wasn't motivating to people. What was actually more motivating to the actual buyers when you actually talked to them and then brought them into the room was the fact that that time was being saved. The time, the man hours, the person hours of managing all of this vast paperwork was actually a lot more painful to them than the extra money that they were spending on the bills themselves. And furthermore, the expertise that the company was bringing into the organization in helping them untangle that spaghetti was a lot more important than the actual hard dollars being saved. And so I agree with everything that both of you guys said. The one thing that I would add to it is make sure you bring real customer perspective into it. Don't fall into the trap that we all do of trying to speak for them.
Yeah, I'm married to a social scientist, and so there's nothing we like as much as a good hypothesis, and then you have to
Yes.
test it.
Yes,
Right?
absolutely. Validate.
Yeah, so what it sounds like is that they ran in my science analogy, they ran full all the way out as if that were a tested idea, before finding
Absolutely.
out, is this something that motivates
Because
you?
why do you need telecom expense management? For the expenses.
Hmm.
And that wasn't quite it.
Hmm. I really love it though, because I do think it still falls into those um, motives and values, that conversation about the deeper reasons people buy, which comes full circle around to what we said at the top of the call, which is, what do you really sell? You have a theory about what that is, you practice that, you put content out, then you go validate. That's really why people are buying. That part hasn't changed, right? That part hasn't changed, of testing our assumptions and our theories. And I think it's interesting to think about companies that have been around a while. Not only are we suggesting on this call that they might need to reorganize and think about who reports to whom and who needs to understand another colleague's perspective, probably a good idea to continually reevaluate, why are people buying from us, and are we still on point with the message in light of the changing environment, right? Just maybe people have different goals and motives than they did several years ago. So always validating that is another important step. So, okay, final questions from the group. Otherwise, I'm going to do a rapid fire with the last question I'm bringing to us. Bob, Dick, Mason, Dennis, anything you'd like to ask, just put it in the chat. Or
No, I came about halfway through, I think right about the time Lydia did, so I'm reluctant. I don't want to interrupt the flow. The recording, will it be shared though? Because I had a
Yes, we will
conflict.
definitely share the recording.
yeah, thanks, Dennis.
Yeah,
Thanks so much.
appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Well, then let's wrap up. This literally has to be like 45 seconds a piece, and then I'll share our contact info and how you can follow any of us if you'd like to stay in touch. My final question is, if you could give one piece of advice to encourage whatever title a person manages the sales team in a client company, okay, you give one piece of advice about managing a sales team in today's environment, what would you want that advice to be? Erik or Craig?
Understand the customer and understand their pain and how they want to be engaged. We're going to do a lot better, especially in this marketplace, and especially as more and more Generation Y are entering I mean, we've got Generation Y now, not only in the workforce, but in middle management. These are folks with money. These are folks with decision-making power in B2B organizations. These are people who are buying consumer goods. They're different. And so understand who your buyer is, and especially if you've got those younger buyers, really take the time to understand what they want from you.
Mm. Thanks, Eric. Craig, what about you? What would
Yeah,
be
and I'm going to piggyback on what Eric said. I'm in 100% concurrence with him. Sales teams, they need to look to the future. Don't think about what's worked in the past, assuming that you want to build your plane for what's going to be successful 3 years down the road. And you're going to gradually work through that over quarters and or years, but let go of the past.
Thanks, Craig. I think mine would be recognizing that people want their work to matter, and they want to understand why selling for someone is important and have conversations about extra value. Because I don't think in their hearts that people want to be transactional in their sales interaction. I think they want real relationships and meaningful relationships. And so creating an environment where that conversation is acceptable and even encouraged sounds like a nice place to work to me. So, okay, well, we're going to officially adjourn so that we have honored the time for people. I can stick around a few more minutes. Please notice all of the resources we have for you. We've got books, we've got LinkedIn connections, we've got 3 different companies. Take a screen capture of this. Please feel free to connect with any of us on LinkedIn. We sure would like to connect with you and appreciate you coming. And if you can stay a few more minutes and you have some more questions you'd like to ask in a little bit more private setting, that's great. I can hang out a few more minutes. Otherwise, we'll officially adjourn and say thank you so much for coming and participating today.